Bio page 2. Okay, so we have previously now, or let's go back to the schedule and kind of talk about the rest of the quarter. So this is always a fun lecture right here. Why aren't you done yet, right? Which basically, Steve, we have an observer today, Steve Conger. Am I supposed to introduce you guys? No? Okay, that's Steve. He's one of the programming instructors. Yeah, basically what I do here is week 11 is kind of the buffer week that we hit everything on schedule this quarter because there were no snow days, nobody got sick, etc. So our week 11 will primarily be an open lab to get all your assignments done, including bio page 2. And at the start of the class, Steve, I'll get up here and I'll point to that and just ask them why they're not done yet. And they'll say, I don't know, because I'm still working on it. Your final presentation then will be held. I need to update that. Let's take a look at the calendar. So, our final presentation will be regular time, 2 p.m. on Tuesday, 22nd. Okay. So basically, what you need to do for your presentation is, if we go to the final presentation assignment, basically what you're going to be presenting as your final presentation is your HTML bio page 2 that we are going to discuss today. And basically, all I need you to do for the presentation, it's not too hard. So let's say if I open up my example bio page, which that link I keep on meaning to fix, but let's say this was my project that I did along with the class, right? So again, Steve, to kind of give you background, all class long, they developed their own logo and learned how to use typographic techniques to create a logo and a brand for themselves. So if I'm representing myself as Premium Design Works and this is the logo that I did in this class, I might stand up here and according to the final presentation, description of project, challenges that arose and how you solved them, why you did what you did when you did it, and again, my joking, because I think I'm a comedian, any dancer you're choosing to entertain us, you don't have to do that, okay? But if I got up here and I said, you know, I was a traditional graphic designer at one point in time, and I had a really old logo that looked really skateboardy, and I wanted to transfer going from the skateboard, snowboard industry, because again, those guys don't have a lot of money, and I wanted to make some money. I needed to represent myself a little more corporate while still keeping the edge to myself. I would then use Arial Black because it's out of the Arial family, so on and so forth, blah, 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 blah. I had trouble with Illustrator, but the demos helped, right? That might be an example presentation, okay? So again, when we get to the presentations, just keep in mind that how many people are going to be getting up and presenting. Keep them pretty wickedly short, you know, right? Unless you want to stay up there for 10, 20 minutes, right? Here's what I did. No, thanks a lot. We all clap for you. And then that's that. Okay. So again, that will be on that Tuesday during finals week. Okay. So in terms of setting type for the web, here's what we got. You guys have already learned how to set type for print, whether you realize that or not, okay? What do I mean by that? Well, if we just go to an example of what you may need to do, so I'll just go to main page here at 1024. So this wireframe document I may or may not have shown you already in this class. It will load. Come on. Yeah, you're there. What is going on? Well, I have Firefox open. Let's go take a look at Firefox. PDF file. So when you guys are doing wireframes down the road, let's say it like this, okay? So when you did what you did in Illustrator, you are in Illustrator doing a document for print, okay? Meaning, if I were to send this document off to a print shop, like with the business cards that you guys did, right? Being a vector program, we could even take this document, and if we said select all, create outlines, we could convert the whole document into outlines and send it off to a printer, and we wouldn't need the fonts to have it printed. And it would print out at whatever resolution the printer is printing at. So again, this one I believe is probably 600 DPI, right? If you look at some of your textbooks, typically high quality textbooks are printed at either 1200 DPI or 2400 DPI, right? So 2400 DPI, dots per inch, is really, really high resolution. Okay, so what we have to do now is we have to take this document that, yeah, it's set up for print, right? But we're not necessarily going to get this printed at a print shop. We're just using this more as a design documentation, right? So if you are wanting to be a website designer, UX designer, whatever kind of electronic medium designer, right? Whether you're working on websites or mobile applications or any piece of software, that kind of stuff. What you might be doing then is doing your wireframe layouts in Adobe Illustrator or some other program, okay? So given if you are a designer, right? Has anybody ever been a designer that's worked with a developer? Okay, and were you responsible at one point in time, Chris, to give them design specifications?
Not really.
Right, not really. Okay. So design specifications, if you are in my WEB112 class this quarter, we will go over what design specifications are, also known as style guides. Here's another term you may have heard, red lines. Who's heard the term red lines? Right. Why do they use the term red lines?
They use red pen. They're red.
Because typically these callouts are in red because they go over a visual document.
When I did it was a long time ago. These things weren't developed yet in red.
Fair enough. Right. So if we go to an old, so let me just kind of give you a preview. If you, yeah, this PDF should be showing here. Oh well, you have to improvise sometimes, you know, when stuff doesn't work. But if we go to my WEB105 class and we go to launch and beyond. And we wait for it, right? What we'll talk about in WEB112 is doing the design, production, development style guides where you may or may not do, again, this PDF probably isn't going to load, is it? Note to send the need report. Huh? All I'm saying, Steve, is welcome to Seattle Central, right? You know as well as I. Happens, you always have to, there's always something that we have to overcome, right? Well, that's okay. Let's not open that. You can see from the screenshot here that I have some arrows to everything, right? As well, where is it? The term sometimes referred to as a red line. Here is an example of a red line from way back when, in 2003, 2004, somewhere in there when I was doing, remember the Lemley Design logo that we talked about, right? So back then, when we were putting his website together, we needed to call out what the typefaces were. You can see here, Verdana 9/14. So remember the shorthand type size over leading, so on and so forth, right? This is where the term red line actually comes from. The lines were red, right? But one way, shape, or form, if we go back to this document, you have already in your document done things like paragraph tag, font size 1 EM, margin bottom 10. Looks familiar to you guys? Yes, it totally does, Mike. So what is 1 EM? Well, if we come and we're going to talk a little bit of responsive typography today, notice up here where if we say in our body tag, so this is laid out as style sheet callouts, right? If we say font size 16 pixels, right? Or another way that we typically call it out is we'll say font size 100%, okay? If we say font size 100% in our body tag, that will then transfer into every last piece of type globally will be 16 pixels. Then if we say line height 150%, again, what does line height refer to? Leading. Okay. Sort of. Leading in the
Baseline to baseline.
well, yeah, baseline to baseline, leading in the post-movable type days. Where the term leading, I don't know if you know this, Steve, comes from the movable type days where they actually put a piece of lead between them, right?
Actually,
So what you guys did then was in your Illustrator document, let's close some of these, blah, blah, blah. Paragraph, character styles, character, no, type, paragraph. Okay, so let's open up these two, close that. So what you guys did then is, if you have this paragraph here, what you did was you said that this type was 14, let's go up, and this type was 14/21, meaning, well, type size 14. So here in the Illustrator world, if we look at this, set the font size, 14 point over 21 point leading, so on and so forth, right? The other settings that you had to achieve were what was the column layout or the column width, right? So again, in terms of readability, the variables that we have to keep in mind for readability is what's the column width? Well, if we have 500 pixels of column width, typically I use 620 today, because of the 960 grid. But if we have 500 pixels and we have 14 pixel or point type, right? What was the character count, the readable zone for character count for a column? Does anybody remember?
70 to 80.
Let's say no more than 80, right? In other words, readability, here's what not to do, Steve. I feel like I'm lecturing just to you. It's fun. No, it's fun. I love having you here. Come on. This is funny. If we go to Wikipedia, and we search for readability, how readable are these paragraphs? Right? Exactly. Mavis says, no, they're not very readable. Again, because what you're doing, blah, 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 in Russia, da, 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 I get to this line, oh, what line am I on? I can't remember. That impedes readability. However, if our column block was this wide, once we get down below the 80 characters per line, we start to get into the readable zone. So a typical readable zone is between 80 and 40 characters per line. Once you dip below 40 characters per line, you are then going line by line by line, right? And again, readability is impeded. So we need to find that happy zone. So therefore, what you guys did was, if you did 14 in a 500 pixel column, or if we go to my blog and we go to this one here, this right here is a 620 pixel column. And if we look at the inspector, that paragraph tag then is font size 16 pixels, line height 24 pixels, margin bottom 10, which makes for nice readable paragraphs. Okay, so how do we go from this world of, we have, let's say, 14 over 16. If we select one of these paragraphs, and again, notice I have show hidden characters on, right? And remember, in this world where we don't have a paragraph return separating these paragraphs, instead, what are we doing to delineate one paragraph away from the other? What? No. No break tag. What?
Padding.
Padding, top, margin, bottom, right? So on our paragraph tag, we'll typically do a space after. On a headline, then, we may do space before and space after. Whatever you guys set up to between column size, point size, leading, space before, space after, all those variables come together to create a readable document within a hierarchy. So, how do we take this into HTML? What? Sure, Dreamweaver, whatever, let's say whatever code editor you want to use, right? We don't just go, oh, look, Flickr is totally giving me random photos again. I love that. It's not one of my latest photos. So if we go to the setting the type for the web lecture, right? If we view bio page 2, we have to then, some way, shape, or form, take our Illustrator document And if our paragraph tag, right, we have font size, for those of you viewing it on the internet, font size 14 pixel, line height 21 pixel, text align I have it justified, margin top 0, margin bottom 10. Now here, this was done a little while ago where I didn't use an overall div tag for the content area. So I'll show you guys how to do that today, where on this paragraph tag, I said margin left 50 to get it to sit away from the left-hand edge. And then I also put a width of 500 on it to control the column width, right? This was back a long time ago. So let's show you what we would typically do now. But one way, shape, or form, you have to now take those settings and transfer them into the web world. Meaning, we go back to the lecture here. You need to, A, use a proper markup. Meaning, here's where, again, how many of you, well, let's just say it like this. Remember when we talked about, hey, do you use an H1 tag for your logo or not? Does everybody remember that discussion? Okay. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, right? It's supposed to be do you know this philosophy?
It's supposed to be your top level header.
Yeah, well, so one theory goes, yes, use an H1 tag for your logo. Another theory says, no, don't use an H1 tag for your logo. The H1 tag should be your main heading on the page, not your logo. A third theory says, use the H1 tag on your logo, but only on the home page and not on subsequent pages. All in the name of search engine optimization and markup and semantics and whatnot. Well, you know, we could go chasing UFOs with Mulder and Scully forever and a day, but I don't think it really matters that much in terms of search engine optimization or semantics. So in my document here, I used an H1 tag to put then my image logo or my image tag with my logo inside of it. I then used an H2 tag for my main level heading. And here I only have main level headings. I don't have sub-level headings, right? So proper markup, right? H1, H2, paragraph tags, so on and so forth in the proper hierarchy, right? In terms of H tags, you have H1 through H6. I've never used an H6 tag. I've gotten down to an H4 tag. So, for instance, if we look at the multiple levels of headlines, we go to this blog posting here. So I'm using an H1 tag in my logo, an H2 tag for my main headline on this page, an H3 tag, right? And then in between the H3 tags, if I need even more tags, I've gone down to the H4 tag, right? So you could think of them as, if I use an H2 tag, right, then I have a set of H3 tags, and between those H3 tags, I have a set of H4 tags, kind of like a Roman numeral outline, if you will, okay? Using a style sheet, right? So this is where then, instead of the old days, where, has anybody ever used a font tag and given a font tag a size? Nobody? Fantastic. That is pretty old school.
HTML.
Yeah.
Writing a size, yeah.
Yeah. Forget you ever learned that, right? Because that was then the, well, let's say it like this. Today, what we are doing is we are separating markup from presentation and interaction, okay? Now, in the server-side dynamic world, we may be using a language like PHP to pre-process our markup, but still, the theory goes that we want to separate these three. Was not always the case. Back in the font tag days, right, if we said font tag size, whatever, and then we had JavaScript, we had an online event handler in our JavaScript and our markup, we were blending all three of these in our markup, okay? Which led to, well, if I wanted to change all font tags to a different size, we had to go one by one. So if Big Boss Man said, you know, change all those to 14, you had to go in one by one and change them all to 14. Big Boss Man would come back and say, you know what? I don't like that. Change them back to 13. Who's ever played that game? Right? So we don't do that anymore. Instead, we use a style sheet where we can declare globals in the body. We can declare our H1, our H2, our paragraph tags, so on and so forth. Then the settings that we would want to use in terms of font size, we can declare our font size. We can declare our line height, which also is the term leading, but in the web world, line height refers to the space from baseline to baseline within a paragraph or a headline tag, so on and so forth. Letter spacing. Typically, we don't use letter spacing unless we need to track something out, right? Rarely do we track things in, but for instance, if you have a very bold typeface and you leave it at normal letter spacing, if it's in like a headline or a menu item, it might be too close together and you might want to letter space it out a little bit, okay? Make sense? Then space before, text align, left, justified right, so on and so forth. Space before and space after. Margin bottom typically, and padding top. So what does this look like in an HTML document? So if we go to, again, view bio page 2, download bio page 2. So I've already downloaded my bio page 2 example. Again, do not take my bio page 2 file, pop your logo in there, change some things around. I want you to experience writing all of this by hand, okay? All right. Same thing with the Illustrator document that we talked about. But what would it look like? Okay. Well, if I had then, let's open this one locally. So I've created my bio page 2 2016 folder. And if I then open this one locally here, and I can close that, right? And we come here, well, in terms of markup then, H1 tag, image, source, images, logo.gif. So remember when you did your logo transfer, right? How many of you realized, uh-oh, I used too delicate of typefaces in my logo transfer? Yeah, are you gonna have to change some stuff a little bit? Okay. Well, one way, shape, or form, you need to go from remember the logo type transfer assignment, right? Where then if I opened up the Illustrator file where I had my logo, I might then have to save this, and this is where I saved it as a Photoshop document. I forgot to open up Photoshop, but let's see how long Photoshop takes to load. In other words, one way, shape, or form, what you're going to have to do is take your logo where you found it to be in that readable zone or in that zone of The typefaces still look okay, right? And you are then going to need to crop it out to put into your so if I open my bio page 2 folder here, right? If I open this GIF file, right, you are going to need to, one way, shape, or form, do something like this. Here is, let's say, my logo PSD transfer. Well, if I then take the cropping tool, right, and I may want to, I don't like their new cropping. Width, height, resolution. Well, let's say I want to grab this one, right? I may want to crop it tighter than that. I would typically want to crop right around the edges of the pixels so that I don't get a big gap over here on the left-hand side, right? So I don't get a big gap down here at the bottom because I'm going to be setting the margin bottom on my H1 tag in CSS. So I may want to, like I said, crop it pretty tightly like that. Go up to export. And I feel, this just makes me feel dumb. Save for web, legacy, that makes me feel old. But that's the way I want to do it. Save it as PNG 24. So you can see width here, 301 by 89. So if I say logo transfer and I put it in my bio page 2, 2016, in my images folder, save, right? So now, there it is. So if I wanted to change the one I have out, right? Using an image tag, looking into the images folder for logo transfer.png. If I go back to the interwebs, I go here and I refresh, right? Now, I have this stupid line right there. Well, what if I wanted, well, let's put it this way. I have a border bottom, okay? Let's say I wanted to have space between the logo and that line a little bit more. What do? How do I edit my H1 tag?
Adding margin.
Not margin, because if I say margin, it's going to go on the outside, right? In other words, if I say margin bottom 20, I've already got a margin bottom 20, right? So let's do this. Let's take a look at this element in space, how it actually looks, right? What is the space it takes up in our document? What I do quite often is I say border 1 pixel solid magenta, okay? Magenta from the CMYK. I'm a print designer, I can't help it, right? So if I do that, then we'll see that this H1 tag takes up 500 pixels wide, right? I've overwritten the border bottom, and it has the 20 pixels space down there. So what I would do instead is, let's get rid of that. I would say, because I have this border bottom there, I might then want to say padding bottom 10 pixels, right? Gives a little bit of space. Now, let's clean this up a little bit. Again, I have some old settings in here, right? So I am going to take off the widths on all elements. Also going to take this border 0 off here. If you ever notice in my CSS resets, you guys know what CSS resets are? Okay, meaning because each browser comes with its predetermined margins and paddings, we always want to set everything back to 0 on margin and padding. Then comes along Internet Explorer, and on all links, it will give you a border. So sometimes we did this border 0, but you may hear Raven say not to do that, and I agree with them now, okay? Because if we do border 0, it is also going to take the style off of your default form elements. Has anybody ever experienced that? Ask Raven, he'll tell you all about it. Anyway, I'm going to delete that. So I'm also going to take off the H1 tag, margin left, margin right, margin right, margin left, paragraph, margin top, don't need that, margin right, margin left. Okay, so what we're left with then is a decent markup here, right? We could, in between one of these, say H3 because I need a subheadline. Hey, here's a subhead. Right? And so now, again, I may want another paragraph in there, right? So why does it look like this? Why does it look like Wikipedia?
You haven't said it.
So let's say it like this. H1 tags, paragraph tags. What type of element are they? What level of element are they? Who said it? Who said block?
I did.
I know, I'm teasing. So block level versus inline level. Again, block level elements act like they have paragraph hard returns after it. Okay? Why do they actually act like that? What's actually happening? Let's say it like this. Well, because they're block level elements, they will render themselves all the way out to the parent width, right? So if I say, again, my little trick that I'm totally taking all the credit for, right? Because I've said border 1 pixel solid magenta on all my paragraph tags, because they're block level elements, they are going to render themselves all the way out to the parent element, okay? So we could then say, I'm going to get rid of that because I already did my CSS resets. I could say max width 500 pixels on my body tag. And now that I've done that, because I applied a width to the parent elements, these will wrap because they get out to the edge of the parent element. So if we put a border 1 pixel, whoops, error, 1 pixel, not solid, solid yellow. I can't type, Steve. Right? Good. Solidarity, man. So now the body tag has a fixed width or a max width. So what's the difference between width and max width?
Means that it can get smaller if the viewport forces it to.
Correct. So if I said width of 500, that is a fixed width. Viewport gets smaller. Whoops, got to refresh. The viewport gets smaller and it doesn't wrap in there. I also have too many tabs open. That's what I do, Steve. I open up as many tabs as humanly possible. So if I then go back here and I change it back to a max width, that means that element will occupy space up until 500. So therefore, if we go back here and I refresh, now, did I refresh it? Max width, save, you gotta save. Now, as we come below 500, it will come in. How do we get it to sit in the center?
Margin of zero auto.
On what? In this case, the body tag, right? I don't know how I feel, honestly, about, this is a new technique. I don't know if you know about this technique, Steve. Instead of doing a page wrapper, a lot of people, yeah, people are using the body tag these days. It makes me nervous. Right? But if you have a white background and you're just doing something like this, you know, no harm, no foul. Still makes me nervous. But apparently it's an accepted methodology these days. I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to move on with my life. So if I want it to sit in the center, margin, 0, auto. So what does the 0 refer to? Right, because remember, we go top, right, bottom, left. So if we did say it like this, that's the same thing. In other words, trouble. Who left?
Oh, I did.
Yeah. Have you ever not heard, have you guys heard it referred to as trouble?
I've heard it.
Top right, bottom left, trouble?
TRB.
Huh? Yeah. Or shorthand, even more, top right, bottom left, or even more shorthand, top right, bottom left, but that's too shorthand. So, okay. Go back here, we refresh, and now our page sits nicely in the center. So if I was going with more modern day settings, 620 pixels, right? Going to select that, comment that out. Comment that out. Go back here. Prom. Well, text is what?
It looks like it's justified, she said.
I'm going to say because I put it out to 620, it's too small. Okay. So I'm going to point you to a couple of lectures of mine that you may want to look at. One is on my business site under my blog, and I should put these down as readings for this assignment. But if we go to, this is, so what I've started doing is, well, let's just say it like this. A lot of my articles, a lot of my tutorials, a lot of my lectures on my school website are showing their age a little bit, right? And sometimes I rewrite them. Sometimes I write completely new articles and post them on my business blog, because then I want to dominate the world in terms of search engine optimization, right? So you might want to take this, look at this Convert a 960 Grid website, layout to a responsive design. It goes in and talks about the Viewport Meta Tag, right? So the Viewport Meta Tag will then, I'm going to bypass this for right now, but the Viewport Meta Tag, what is the Viewport Meta Tag? What does it do?
Is that the one that checks the size of the viewport? Or is that the one that?
Let's put it this way. If I'm looking at this on a browser here on my desktop and I do this, it's going to look responsive. However, if I look at it on my phone, it is not. Your phone and your tablet and other devices want to access the viewport, right? Remember, pixel density and viewport are two different things, right? As far as my understanding goes, the viewport will convert everything to 72 pixels per inch at whatever width. So viewport for an iPhone is 563, 360? Somewhere in that range. I would show you this awesome mobile and tablet viewport sizes screen DPI. This used to be a really awesome part of my lecture that I used to count on. And you know as well as I do that if you count on things on the web, you are going to be sorely disappointed. So there's another one. Well, it's just, yeah.
So just like it is right, like the Viewport Meta Tag basically makes it so that the page will always render at like 72 points per inch.
That's sort of correct, not really correct.
Because it is true how like the brand new iPad has like really, really small pixels.
Right.
The one from 4 years ago, they're not.
Right. So what I understand is, like I said, the Retina displays are now like 96 up to 11 billion pixels per inch, right? So my translation, how I understand in my head, may not be factually accurate, right? But the way I understand it is, it will take my document, because as far as I know, we're still rendering at 72 pixels per inch, even though we're on Retina displays, right? In other words, one point is 1 pixel. Remember when we did that conversion in Illustrator?
Yeah.
Same thing here. So the viewport size would take our document, and if we had a width of 620, this viewport then at 563 is 563, but it's more than 560. It's at like 96 pixels per inch because it's a Retina display. So what is happening is a viewport is a viewport. How it's calculated, I'm not exactly 100% sure, but what I do know is if this is 563 wide, right, and then this is 620, so it's going to come in a little bit, this phone wants to access the meta name viewport tag to know that 563 is less than 620, let's bring it in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's how I understand it.
So if you don't put it there, then you basically everything would be keyhole.
Yes. So in other words, if I don't put it there, it's going to take that 620 and squeeze it. Not wrap the text, but squeeze it down.
Like just take the image from corner to corner.
Right. So when you're on your phone and you see a website that has not been converted to responsive and you have to zoom in, it's going to do that. Does that make sense?
I know those sites.
Yes. They're getting less frequent.
Yeah, I thought.
That's my understanding.
But I thought instead of squeezing it down, I thought it would just make it so it's only going to show you that, like, the end is going to be cut off. You have to scroll around.
Not if you say max width. right, it's going to render out to 563. If you say width, it's a fixed width, so it's going to cut that off. Yes. Does that make sense? Okay. So does everybody understand that relatively? Okay. Responsive typography. Here's what we do now. Instead of using pixels, we use ems. Why do we use ems versus pixels? Well, I'm still tempted to say a pixel is a pixel is a pixel, whatever. Why don't we use pixels? It's still going to render 16 over 24 and be done with it. Then Big Boss Man is going to come along and say, no, I want all the type on the whole site to go down 10%. Does that make sense? So you'd have to then, again, just like the font tag, you'd have to adjust each one of those. So instead, what we do now is, and this is what I've been doing, font size 100%, line height. I'm going to leave line height out of the body tag this time. I go back and forth between setting a global line height versus setting elemental line heights. Does that make sense? Okay. So font family, Arial Helvetica Sans Serif. Font size, 100%, right? Actually, I'm going to do line height this time. Line height, 150%. So what I've just done is, remember our 2/3 formula for readability for body copy, right? So in other words, if we have 16 over 24, that breaks down to 2/3 or 100 over 150 or 1 over 1.5. But you can't do fractions that way, right? Yeah.
So is
That's my readability.
the font size to 100% the same thing as setting it to 1M?
Yes. Yes and no. So what we are doing is we are setting a font size to 100%. So yes, we are saying 1M is 100%. Yes. Or we're saying 1M is 16 pixels. Here's what I mean. If given the Ethan Mark, does everybody know the Ethan Marcotte responsive book? Okay, if you don't, that was a big hit a few years ago, and I read it in a night, and all of a sudden I knew how to do responsives. Okay, so his formula, or what he explains, is if I set a font size to 100%, what I'm actually doing is saying all typography sizes, all font sizes on this website everywhere are now 16 pixels. So if you don't set any global font size, or you don't set any font size at all, the defaults now, if you don't set any font size, the default font size of body copy is 16 pixels, right? The default size of headlines, H2s, are, I can't remember what they are. The default size of H3 are whatever the default size is, I can't remember. But if, let's see if this works now. If I set all font sizes to 100%, what I am saying is every piece of type, HTML type on this website should be 16 pixels as a starting point. So it didn't really work the way I thought it would. What was the,
Well, so my question is just in a body, is there a difference between saying like quote unquote 100% and saying 1M? Like why do you say 100% there instead of 1M? Maybe that's something
because Ethan Mark told me so.
I'm just wondering if it makes a difference if there's like a compounded later on.
It should be the same thing, shouldn't it? Like one M is.
I'm hesitant to say for sure. It's something I'd have to look up and test.
It's kind of hair splitting, but like.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like we would assume it would be, but it's also one of those things that you would do it and be like, fuck, why isn't it this way? And it just wouldn't be. You don't know why.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. If that's like a hard question.
Yeah, so Ethan Marcotte is the one who coined the term responsive design, and he told me so.
Okay, I'll take that.
He's my responsive Jesus. See you, Steve. Right?
Cool.
Why would that book be worth $820?
Quite fine.
The signature's worth that much on an instruction manual?
You haven't read it.
So Steve is part of my tenure committee, observing me. So Jill should have been here. She's not here. This lecture, just so you guys know, is going to run into a little bit of Thursday as well as to when we do the at font face stuff, right? But we're going to up this class to 4 credits down the road. So who had the question?
I have, can you do, I mean, I know you can, but font size equals or is 16 pixels, and then right below it, say font size 100% for browsers that have trouble?
I don't know. I'd have to look into it, right? What I do know is it's common practice to basically set our M at 16 pixels. And then from here, right, if we set now, let's also do the H3 there. So if I then said on my H2 tag, let's say on my H2 tag, I wanted it to essentially be 36 pixels. How would I turn that into 36 pixels in terms of M's? Right, 36, and this is straight out of the Ethan Marcotte. Divided by 16. I'm not good at math.
2.25.
36 divided by 16, 2.25, correct. Five M's, okay? So if I then set my H3 at 2.25 EMs as well, it is going to use 16 pixels as its definition. So that's how it works, right? So I'm going to say margin bottom on my H2. I'm going to go up to 8 pixels. Margin bottom on H3, 8 pixels. Instead of 2.25, let's say 24. So I'm going to say 24 divided by 16. At 1.5. .5 EM. Now, notice this. Because my line heights are at 21 pixel. This is how line height also affects your margin bottoms, right? So that's why it was so tight there. If I now, let's actually put these side by side if I can. Why wasn't I doing it side by side this whole time? So now if I comment out these line heights here, again, I've set a global line height of 150%. So this is going to be 2.25 EMs over 150%, right? Meaning 36 pixel over whatever 150% 36 pixels is. Okay, we didn't see a whole lot of change. I think, so let's say we had a wrapping subhead like this, right? Meaning, let's go here. Let's take a look at this subhead or this headline right there. So if we inspect this, and on my H2, I have a line height of 125%. Let's say I switch that to 150%. How readable is this headline now? Not as great. How about now at 100? You now know why I go to 125% of my headlines. Because if they wrap, you have to find that nice wrap zone. I'm sure there's a hip hop joke in there somewhere. Okay. So I'm going to say 125% on my headline 2 and 125% on my H3. For my paragraph, so now let's go back, and if we do that, I save, right? So now, yeah, that might be a little too much off of the H2, margin bottom, let's say 4, margin bottom, let's say 4. But you should follow whatever settings you did. Now I'm modifying my settings for demo purposes, right? But you should follow whatever settings as close as possible as you did in your Illustrator file. But if you realize, that doesn't look great, I need to change it. You do not need to come to me and say, what if my bio page 1 and my bio page 2 don't match up exactly? So what's the answer? A, I'm not going to catch that. B, I don't care. C, I'm just not going to catch that. Because I'm drinking too much, right? Oh, Steve isn't here to hear my jokes anymore. So font size on the paragraph tag. I'm going to declare 1M. Line height, we've already declared a line height of 150. So if I do that, it's going to look like this, right? Is everybody following along on this? Not rocket science, right? This should be stuff you already know to a large extent, right? But again, I want you to not use my document. I want you to create your own document from scratch, however you want to create it, whether you want to have an internal style sheet, right? So I am using on this one an internal style sheet, right? Style tag and style tag. If you want to use an external style sheet, you're more than welcome to use an external style sheet. But because it's one document, you might just want to do it as one document, right? Okay. 10 more minutes. Let's start to now get into the at font face stuff, and we'll pick it up down the road here. Okay. So if I do this, Or should we just call it a day now and then pick this up on Thursday?
Depends on if you have a good break point in there.
Let's say it like this. Font family. If I take this and I comment that out, you may or may not see it. Well, you will, because now it's going to change it to just regular Arial, right? So what we need to do is we need to take whatever font we used and load it from our servers. Possibly illegally. But we're not going to care about that for this classroom.
It's okay for classroom.
In other words, I'm going to use the @FontFace selector to load the font family of Arial MT Standard Black. Once I do this, load that, I am saying in, and I should actually do it in my H1 tag in case my image doesn't load.
So do you create like a fonts folder in your folder?
Do.
It's connected to. Okay.
So I will have now my index.html file along with an images folder, along with the fonts folder that then houses the .eot, the .svg, the .ttf, the .woff, etc. Okay? So if I then open up this demo page here, this was generated with Font Squirrel. Okay, so this is a way of how you say load, oops, fonts like felt tip Roman. So if I turn felt tip Roman off, it's going to default to whatever generic sans serif. Okay, so how the font declaration works is try this first. If it's not there, use that. If that's not there, use this. If we can't find anything, use whatever generic sans serif there is. Okay, so typically, if we are in our body tag declaring this, you've all seen a font family declaration like this, yes? So go find Arial. If Arial's not available, use Helvetica. If Helvetica is not available, use sans serif. So what this actually means is, and what I might want to do is just do this. Get rid of Helvetica altogether, because Helvetica used to be just on the Macs. Arial used to be just on the PCs. Now, both Macs and PCs are shipping with Arial. So how this declaration works again is, if I am saying in my body tag, load Arial, it is looking for Arial in the system folder on the computer, right? So if I have Arial Black activated in Suitcase, really? They're not a Arial Black? What's going on? Microphones. Portfolio, font library. Arial. Arrow Hebrew, narrow, arrow. Interesting. That's why things don't work on these computers a lot. Interesting. Well, one way, shape, or form, when you do a font declaration, that font declaration digs into the system folder to find that font to load. So what if you are using felt tip Roman? Does everybody have felt tip Roman on their computers? No, because you have to buy it and then use it illegally like I'm doing. I bought it. I'm housing it on my server illegally. Okay. So if we look into,
If you bought it, why is that illegal?
because I don't have the end user license agreement to house it on my server.
You can like put it on something you're gonna print.
I can use it in print. I can't house it on my server because somebody could steal it, right? So that means what I do is my examples folder, I have robots.txt file that says, hey, legit search engines don't index my examples folder. So I hide a lot of stuff in here, like the Ducat book. You know those devices that I have on these devices right here? See what I'm saying? See how you could download those, Aaron? Yeah.
Stealing everything
I then have felt tip Roman. So here I have all of those stored. Now this isn't the exact place that my server grabs them from. It grabs them from my themes folder in my WordPress install.
You have to have all those formats for the fonts, like the TTF and the.
You do and you don't. It's good practice too. Okay. However, let's do it like this. Where you can convert it all, and we'll do this on Thursday, is you can generate all those through Font Squirrel, which Microsoft and Adobe and some other type manufacturers have really locked down on Font Squirrel and won't let you convert them all. So I believe there are some others that online font converter that works, right? Internet Against Authority. But one way, shape, or form, those were converted via the Font Squirrel back when I still could do it with that typeface. So if you can't, you should be able to just declare an open type or true type format. That open type or true type should, air quotes, should, air quotes, work on Chrome, on Safari, or excuse me, Firefox on Safari. Okay. True type, open type should work Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. So if you cannot convert to all the formats because you're using a font that the manufacturer is really cracked down, just do the open type or true type. But here's the thing, when you are testing on your computer, deactivate the font in Suitcase or your font management program, because if you go and test it and you have it loaded on your machine, it's going to load from the system folder in your machine. Does that make sense? So you must test it.
Just check it on your phone.
Yeah. And again, it should open type, true type, should. So in this class, what I say is do the open type or true type, because all of you should be using an open type or a true type font. Try to convert it. If you can't convert it, just leave it alone, and or use a font you can convert. But I would rather you just leave it alone, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see you did it properly. Right? Does that make sense? So we'll stop here today and go a little bit more into at Font Face on Thursday, and then you'll have Thursday for Open Lab after that, and then all of the week after is one big Open Lab to get everything done, right? How was this lecture today? A little informative? Yeah, again, it should be live, so Josh, you're probably watching at home. Send me an email, dude.